Hey, and good evening. Welcome to Alta3 Research and a study this evening on the new radio process called RACH. So as it turns out, in order for your cell phone to use a network, it actually has to raise its hand and ask permission to speak. And the process to do so is amazingly complex. The process, random access channel, seems like it should be as simple as press to talk, but far from it. So what we're going to do here with the Alta3ers is to do a little experiment. So guys, good evening. You ready? Don't all speak at once.
Hello.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So here's what we're going to do. You are going to watch for this little puzzle piece to go scrolling over like this. And as soon as you see it right here, I want you to say, now. And you're going to prove something for me because my guess is you're going to do a terrible job of this. But let's find out. Here it comes.
Now.
Whoa.
Now.
Well, it wasn't too bad. It exactly wasn't a chorus, but one more.
Oh.
Meow.
Now.
Oh, that was wretched. Think about, why is this not working? Why aren't you guys all saying now at the same time?
Now.
Oh, this is terrible. Guys, why aren't you saying now at the same time?
So we're depending on timing coming from not ourselves. Timing is, we don't have any sense of timing right now.
No, there's no notion of it.
Now.
Yeah. Because speed, you know what? Speed of light's just too slow. To 5G, actually even LTE, speed of light is a snail. It is unbelievably slow. But let's understand the goal. And I just want you to think about how complex this would be to make this happen. Watch. Here we go. This is all I'm asking for. Do you see what had to happen? Engineers had to figure out how to take that little puzzle piece and hit that exact spot at that exact moment in order for it to work. Do you understand? I bet not. Watch. Let's consider this. Watch again. Oh boy. Now, first of all, guys, do you think that would work?
Can't they just use synchronized GPS clocks or something?
No, positively not. That would definitely not work. And we're going to ask why. That was a great idea, actually. But let's stick with this question first of all. Will that work? What you see right there on your screen?
No.
No, zero. That's a fail. It's got to be dead on. Well, okay, why did it miss? Why did it miss? Now, you have to understand, if it's off by a few microseconds, this isn't working.
Propagation time of the wave.
That's right. That's exactly right. If this cell phone were right next to the cell tower, he would have been bang right on. But by the time the signal got out to here that taught him when to speak, until he turned around and came back, it's too late.
Don't they know how far away they are?
Say again, please.
Do they know how far away they are?
I haven't taught you how they could do that yet, but there is a process that can be used that once they latch on, they can know. And we're going to study certain sequences that permit that. But until you lock on,
at startup, they don't.
No, they can't. There's no way. But what engineers came up with is super cool. So, and actually, to even understand this comment, you would actually have to think about what you just said, which is, hey, you missed the target. You need to increase your clock, slide it forward by whatever it has to ratchet to. And trust me, if it does that, if this remote phone does that, then it will hit that target dead on. This is what we're studying tonight. This is all that we're studying tonight. It should be too easy. So, hey, why not use linking off of a satellite up here and actually just tie in with GPS. Never work, because the GPS isn't going to calculate the latency from this point to that point that we can hit dead on when that tower's expecting it. And it turns out it doesn't have to. There's a really good way, and it's part of the RACH process. So let's continue then. Why RACH and why is it needed? So Chad, you happen to remember where these little mine? You remember where they made their debut, right?
Oh, sure. That's a Finding Nemo classic.
Yeah, right. Mine. And the tower here saying, you guys are killing me. So we can agree that these birds need synchronization. So let's give them some. The first thing that we need is something that's going to do that. So before we do, anybody remember who that guy is that's going ZZZ?
Jimmy Olsen.
Oh, no, you remember.
Flagging down Superman with his little fancy wristwatch.
Oh, my gosh. Yes, and would you happen to know the frequency that Jimmy Olsen uses?
Oh, it's
yeah, that's 1 million.
Oh, okay.
That's 1 million cycles per second in audio. That's insane. But Superman's super hearing apparently hears this. But in 1956, somebody was putting radio in a watch. So it's, not unheard of. Yes. By the way, it is Superman. And by the way, this would never work. This would never work at all. So I'm not going to let you out of here without a little bit of physics. I'm going to have you understand autocorrelation. Yes, you're going to have to learn it. Here's Jimmy saying this thing must be broken. So here's the rule. Superman never will show up unless he can synchronize on the second Z. Unless he hears the second one, he won't show up. Superman hears Z, 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 but he never shows up. Why?
Don't overlook the fact that Jimmy Olsen is a super annoying little twerp, and maybe Superman doesn't want to show up. But
actually, there are comic books that explored that option. Got to be careful. You're crossing into my world. But that's not why. Superman heard Z, but he has to positively know it was the second one. And he doesn't show up. How come? Definitely
don't know.
Well, you have to use autocorrelation in your answer. Okay. If you hear this Z, would that one therefore be the second? And you would all answer yes, of course. The thing is, how do you know that this was the first one? You don't. Therefore, you can't know this one was the second one. So autocorrelation means that if I listen to the sequence of Jimmy Olsen's watch at any point along the way, it'll never match any other part of the sequence. And ZZZ is a train wreck for autocorrelation. I could not use that in order to synchronize. If I'm listening to a tower going ZZZ, I don't know which Z it is. That's never going to work. If it even went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, if it even counted, at least I could tell where it was in the sequence, right? All right, so we need some sort of signal, like a string of music with a really powerful lick that I can name that song in 4 beats. And by the way, if you play that song for me, I can tell you which measure it actually started. So the music analogy is really helpful here. So it turns out that a Zadoff-Chu sequence, or later the M sequence, is what's needed to cause this absence of autocorrelation. Now, I know it's a bullet slide and it's hard, but let's just go down through it. The Zadoff-Chu sequence, it is custom calculated. And every term in the sequence means that if I enter into the sequence right here and I listen from that point, I'll know that I started at that point. I don't know that I started on term number 3, but I will never hear turn number 3 until go all the way to the end and circle around again. And it cycles over and over and over again. But I can always tell where I entered into it once I hear one cycle. Guys, have you already figured out how this could work? Could we use this for timing? Because if I'm listening to this sequence and I know that at this point is when I really should be transmitting, or maybe it's back here because I have to go in time this way or that way, because I have a sequence that never autocorrelates, I can use this to stay perfectly in sync with my tower. And that's the goal here. So now, why do you need to know this? You know, part of me almost wants to say, once you understand why it's necessary, you don't have to know this anymore. But if you're trying to understand why a primary reference source is so important, and particularly 5G, why the Zadoff-Chu sequence doesn't even work anymore, which is disappointing, that would be helpful. Once we put this to bed, RACH is pretty simple. So a receiver has to lock onto the transmitter and locked onto the same transmitter. This is insane. So here's a cell tower, over here's a cell tower, and here's a tower. They're all the exact same frequency. And if I lock onto this guy and I grab his Zadoff-Chu sequence, how do I know I'm not locking onto this guy or that guy? And the difference, and the reason is because adjacent towers use a cyclic adjustment in their Zadoff-Chu or the ZC sequence, that once I lock onto this guy, I stay locked onto him. And then another insane thing, which is kind of beyond our discussion tonight, is the ability to understand that these adjacent cell towers, well, wouldn't that appear as noise? And actually it won't, because the nature of Zadoff-Chu is if you play the two right on top of each other, they won't interfere. They're orthogonal. You know what that means, right? Orthogonal means that if you choose any frequency and you choose another frequency that is orthogonal to it, you can tune in on the one and the other one just magically disappears. It's crazy what you can learn if you do a little bit of math. Well, a lot of math. But it turns out that this has that. So that means that even though these guys are all on the same frequency, I can completely ignore them, tie into this guy, and if I listen to the sequence, no longer going Z, 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 but actually terms that change every single time, I can lock on to exactly where I am in the timing sequence. So interestingly, in 5G, if we read this right here, in the 5G primary synchronization source, you can't use Zadoff-Chu because of M series. Or actually, because they're using M series, they don't use Zadoff-Chu because there is a limitation. And it has to do with frequency and Doppler effect. Now you say, well, Doppler effect, I'm not moving around that much. And what frequency fade would there be? And I said, well, in the sub 6 gigahertz, not much. But when you get up into millimeter wave, you know what they're going to do? What they're going to do is have a cell tower. And by the way, the cells, forget about them. That's yesterday's. In 5G, there's going to be beams that are going out like this. And they're going out in the radius like this. And they're actually going to swing these beams back and forth and steer them to follow you. Which means in the process of moving beams, there's potentially a lot of Doppler effect of adjacent beams. Well, in Zadoff-Chu, you lose the guaranteed immunity that you would otherwise get normally that you want, which is I don't want this dreaded autocorrelation. I want that to go away. And when you're beam forming, I could actually correlate with one of the other beams if they're moving, and there's certain frequency shift as it goes through the atmosphere. Well, there's another technique which kind of falls deeply in the category of who cares, I guess, in that M series doesn't have that limitation. It's not as good as ZC, but it doesn't have the weaknesses. So we've elected to do that. So that being said, well, we now have a Kazakh sequence. That means constant amplitude, zero correlation, which is ZC, or we can use the M series like we are in 5G and stay locked on. All right, so much for the boring stuff then. We see how we lock on. Let's learn about what that puzzle piece was then. So as it turns out, this puzzle piece is part of what's called the new radio grid. And if you go up and down, you'll see these numbers. In this case, I'm showing 10. In reality, there's 12 steps. I'm only showing 10 right here per each one of these. And going on time, each one of these would be a millisecond. So one radio, or actually one RB, as it were, a resource block or a physical resource block would actually be 12. And if I, I'm actually looking at a resource block inside of right there. That's what that guy is. Inside of this, there's going to be 12 frequencies. That's up and down. And side to side, there's going to be 14 columns inside of this. So maybe our next step then is to drill inside of that and see what's in there. Meanwhile, our birds need organized. So when they're saying mine, we're going to organize them on certain puzzle pieces. So they're not going to step on top of each anymore. They can't. And because we have the ZC, or in this case, an M series, maintaining synchronization, they're going to transmit their little puzzle pieces at exactly the right time. And if they're a little bit off, it's only going to be the first time. We're going to knock them on sync. And what will happen is the puzzle pieces hit the cell tower at the exact same time. All of this is part of the RACH process. So back to that puzzle piece that I wanted to talk about a moment before. That little puzzle piece, one of those, as it turns out, is going to be anywhere from 42 to 168 bytes in size. So it's at why the difference then? Well, if you're closer to the cell tower or you're farther away, but the conditions are perfect, you get to use this. If you're far away from the cell tower or the conditions are really bad, worst case is probably going to be somewhere around 42 bytes per each one of these little puzzle pieces here. So our thinking then is, okay, that's where this 12 rows and 14 blocks comes into, which our little bird right here is complaining, hey, only 168 bytes. I'm thinking, well, you're lucky you even got that. He said, I want lots more of these. I need to do a 2 megabyte worth of upload. So that means I need 11,905. And the tower over here says, no worries. I got billions of these. There's plenty of physical resource blocks. We're going to schedule them. So that explains what the puzzle piece are, where you see those puzzles going in. And by the way, there's a lot more puzzle pieces. This is PowerPoint, and I can't make it microscopic enough to show you what's going on in 5G. But the idea is we have a resource grid. So as I go up like this, that's higher frequencies. And as I go across like this, that's time. And if I want to hit that little piece, so I have my phone right here that wants to plug that little piece into there, great. When you do that, you're going to upload somewhere between 168 bytes or maybe all the way down to 42. Okay. So what if we start this? What if we run this like this? And we observe, okay, there's a certain point in time when I want to transmit that. Meanwhile, there's a lot of empty blocks going by, aren't there? And we want to pack every single one of them, but we're going to need users to do that. So we saw how the 48 to 168 bytes hits that exact point. That's radio frame perfection. And we see that if the phone picks up, in this case, an M series, it's a Zulu or a Zadoff-Chu in LTE, it may miss. But because the Zadoff-Chu is a constant sequence coming out to the phone can actually watch that coming into it. And if it has to ratchet it up or back in time, it's able to do that because the primary synchronization source is going to make sure that the phone stays locked in. Now, hopefully you're seeing why that would never work from a satellite, because a satellite is not on the path. Satellite's at another point in space. I need the signal to come from here. And we need to put bits in the air that when this guy's receiving it, he can figure out, okay, I can synchronize with you. I'm going to know exactly when to transmit. And you see what he did. And when he misses, well, it turns out that missing is essential, isn't it? You got to miss the first time to figure out how much you have missed. And then you ratchet back onto space or onto place, and it just works. Finally, we are actually ready, the last slide, believe it or not, to understand RACH. How does this work? Well, here we have a cell phone, and it just can't wait to transmit a text, let's say. You're ready to go. The first thing to do in the master information block is listen to the primary synchronization source, and you lock in. That's the first thing the phone has to do. Next thing it has to do is listen to system information block, which is way beyond the scope, but you would not be able to, the phone would not be able to listen to that until it first decoded the MIB. Once the system information block is understood, now we understand the size of the grid, the timing of the grid, the numerology. That means each one of those little puzzle pieces, how big can it really be? The first step is the phone sends the RACH message. That's what I had all you guys do. That's what you did. You said now. That was, you were ratching. And that was the point. So what happens is the cell tower must come back and said, okay, you need to do a timing advance. And we saw why. If the UE's, the user equipment, which you never say phone, you say UE. If the UE is far away, you got to move it up a little bit. You're too far away, bud. And ultimately we'll get it on schedule. But what's interesting, actually quite interesting, is we have no idea who this phone is. Or I should say the cell tower has no idea who the phone is. None. Because up until right here, the cell tower never even heard of that phone. Well, maybe a few hours ago, but right now, this is the first time he's hearing from him. So it's like, hey, bud, ratchet up your time. And that sequence, interestingly enough, the RACH sequence, when you guys said now, that was Zadoff-Chu as well. In that case, it actually was ZC. It's called a preamble, and you have to send that because the tower has to lock onto you. It has to, because your phone is the tower to the tower, right? It's receiving you. You're transmitting. So it tunes you in the next step. So your next step, this is interesting. When you chose your sequence, you chose a number from 0 to 63 in your sequence, right? So let's say you chose the number 42. I think that's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And said you chose 42. Then right here in this message says, you who have chosen 42, tell me who you are. Now, you have to understand 2 or more phones could have said 42 over here. It's not necessarily you, right? So what's going to happen is your phone is then going to send the next message. I'm 42, Stuart Fieser, blah, 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 and all this information about my identity. And if the phone comes back and said, hey, you, Stuart Fieser, blah, 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 here's your ID. Great. But if the message comes back right here and it says, hey, Chad Fieser, welcome. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because Chad and I both sent in a 42. Chad won. My phone didn't. No worries. My phone will try it again. Right down through the RACH process one more time. It's unusual that a collision can occur, but it does occur. From that moment on, once the phone is allocated spectrum, doesn't have to do this again for that transmission. And that's the process of RACH. It happens every time you guys hit the send button. Every time you surf the web. Anytime you send a text message. And until your phone goes radio silent, your phone has to RACH before it speaks. Lastly said, How many messages before anything happens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then your phone gets to do whatever it wants to do. Does your head now hurt?
It's been hurting all day. I have a question, Stu.
Yeah.
So the 5G spectrum, there's a difference between that and 4G. Obviously.
Oh yeah, big difference.
So where does that? So when you're trying to send a message, that like you were just saying, if two of you are trying to send a message at the same time, what happens if you have one 5G, one 4G? They're both on different spectrums.
Oh, nothing. Nothing.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Nothing at all. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is how they're going to choose to share spectrum. If 5G is going to have 2 frequency ranges, and initially they're going to be outside of the frequencies they use for 4G, right? So the frequency range number 1 is actually right here in the 4G spectrum. That's where LTE lives today.
Okay.
And Zadoff-Chu works fine in that. But when you get up into here where you actually have to beamform, that means they put lots of antennas and they play around with the phase and they drive a long beam, and then they'll have these little sub beams, like little noisy things, little splinters going off the side. But as long as your phone is in the main beam right here, you're in millimeter wave. Oh, by the way, you're uploading and downloading a gigabit a second. Then your phone definitely behaves a lot differently than it does then. And everything. The thing is, everything we do as far as radio concerned, when you hop into the FR2 range, behaves completely differently. And for the record, only a year ago, the ZC process was actually used for PSS. They found out it didn't work, particularly in the millimeter wave, which is why it's really hard to keep a course up to date when 5G, when ultimately learning laws of physics as we go. Maybe one more thing that I would say then in passing, engineers, interestingly enough, they don't like to solve these big problems. In training, they expect the RACH process to be explained to them in a way they can understand, like we just did right here. And then when they understand, it's okay, break out the math, which then we would do next. But they still wouldn't like it. But there's an amazing product that I really like from MathWorks that actually called the 5G Toolbox, that what it does is it breaks the entire sequence of components from digital to analog, actually even before a Fourier transform, all the way through to the transport, the radio, right through the air and receiving at the other end. And mathematically predict every step along the way. And math doesn't lie. They get it right. So what engineers are able to do with this product is that can model basically like a CAD system on their really powerful laptops, is to predict, if I tweak this, if I change this, if I use this sequence, what results will I get? And rather than to have to go through millions of dollars of work in building components to see if it actually works, they can model it. And it has made a world of difference. And I've just downloaded the latest copy of MathWorks that I want to play with, that would actually demonstrate. You could be a mad scientist. I'm designing my own 5G architecture. What if I use this frequency? What if I use these particular sequences? What kind of performance will I get? And the math doesn't lie. It'll show you it works great, or you just designed a train wreck. And again, does your head hurt well enough at this point? Silence.
That hurt my head a little bit more, but I didn't notice because my head was hurt already.
Yeah, you would. And all this just to press a button on your phone.
Yeah, it's amazing
that it even works. Yeah,
yeah.
That it is. that it is. I tell you, for me, when the puzzle piece hit the exact spot at the exact moment, how did they do that? It's remarkable. All right, let's call it right there. See you next time, guys.
Hey, thanks, Lou. Have a good night.
All right, see ya.
Good night, everybody.